block. I'm Genevieve, and this is Behind Open Doors. So glad you could be with us today. I am going to be changing up a little bit on things because I had my guest give me a call this morning and let me know that she is not feeling well. And so I want to wish all the best to Amanda as she recuperates and recovers her strength. And we are definitely working to get her rescheduled at some point in the near future so that she can share with us the information that she has from her experiences in life. But today I kind of had to switch gears real quick. And so just want to make you aware that today's content is kind of a little bit of a perspective of mine. And I'm going to be talking a little bit about how I came to the place of sex positivity that I did. And as I get into that a little bit, we'll be talking about what it means to be sex positive and how that sort of connects with and interrelates with the work that I do here at the Transverse, but also what I do wider in the work that I do in helping people through discovering a healthy sex life, healthy intimacy, and relationships. But before we jump into the content, I do want to point out some of our house rules. You are very welcome to ask questions. You can ask those in the chat. Today I'm going to be interacting directly with the chat. So you can ask those in chat, or you can shoot any of the mods, Charlotte for example, because I'm hosting, so I won't be answering too many questions on Whisper. But if you have a question that you don't want to ask publicly where people can identify who you are, go ahead and whisper that to Charlotte or one of the other mods, and then they will pass that along to me in our private chat so that I know what that question is and I can respond to it as quickly as possible. Secondly, respect. Again, I'm going to be looking at chat, and the reality is that when we're all in this space, it's kind of like I've invited you into my house. And for me, the number one place for any guest to sit is at my dining room table. I love to sit down at a table with friends and have coffee or just share in a meal or something like that. But one of the things that happens whenever we go into someone's house is we need to treat them with respect, but also we need to treat all of those others around us with respect. So I just ask that as you come into the chat, just treat everybody with respect. Don't say things that, would get you smacked on the nose with a rolled up newspaper. So please respect each other, respect me, and respect the mods, because they are the ones who are going to control whether or not you can stay in chat. Third, love and grace. I envision this space as an opportunity for anyone to come in here to be able to share their experiences, to talk about who they are and what they're going through. And so I would ask that you would just show love to everyone who is in the chat. We are all human beings, we are all sexual beings, and we all need to be treated with that love and that grace that comes in trying to treat other human beings so that they become the best version of themselves. So please just respect the atmosphere of love. Recognize that other people are going through things that you may not understand. They may also have things going on that are so powerful and pressuring on them right this moment that any kind of comments that would tear them down may add to that stress. So please treat each other with grace. Next, appropriate open conversation. I want the chat to feel free to communicate. As I'm watching it, I'm going to try to be mindful of questions or comments in the flow of the conversation, but I'm also going to ask that if something is out of line, that my mods go ahead and take care of that and hide that as quickly as possible, because we need to be appropriate in this space. And coming into this space and respecting me as the host and others as guests doesn't give you a right to be inappropriate. People may not understand what you are trying to say, and if you come in and you try to force something or you try to push something upon other people, it disrupts the flow of that space of love and grace and the respect we show to each other. And then finally, consent. If you do not know whether or not somebody would like a joke, don't tell it. If you don't know whether or not a comment is appropriate, don't share it. Whisper it to one of the mods and see if they can clarify that for you. Not everyone is going to get who you are or where you're from, and so just treat each other with that consent. In this space, if you don't know someone, don't assume that you have consent to say something. If you do know someone, that doesn't mean that you can assume that you can say anything you want to. So just realize that you have to do your part to be a part of a good conversation. So there we go. All right, on with the rest of the show. Again, Charlotte's over there. She's kind of looking out for me. I appreciate that. Also, if you want to get in on the drawing for the virtual, I mean, not the virtual, but the transgender. Good Lord, I'm struggling today because I've had a few issues come up. But if you want to get in on the drawing for the droid that has been custom painted with transgender colors, those feebucks that you see are very important for that. So just keep an eye on that and watch those numbers go up. But if you want to really help out, you can subscribe to the channel and support us in what we are doing, not just here, but in the transverse as a whole. Like I said, today I want to talk a little bit about sex positivity and bring to your attention kind of where I come from on that. For those who don't know, my background is very religious. I am an ordained United Methodist pastor. I'm no longer serving as a pastor, but I did serve as a pastor for 23 years. And my coming to an awareness or an attitude of sex positivity was not immediate. In fact, it's something that I had to be awakened to. And that sex positivity, the awakening, I have to attribute to one person and the work she and her partner are doing to educate and inform people all around the world. In my youth, I grew up in a very conservative Christian home. And while I was in that home, the sense of being loved, of being wanted, of being accepted revolved around how good I was. And so as long as I was a good boy, back then I was a boy, but to everyone else, as long as I was a good boy, I felt like I've earned people's love. And when it came to the issues of sexuality and sex in general, and my body as I began to develop, keeping that rule of being the good boy was important. My first sexual encounter didn't happen until I was in college. And even though I was not married, I was out of marriage whenever I had that first sexual... I still wanted to try to follow the rules. I still wanted to do what I could to make sure that I was good, to make sure that I was right with everyone. And so when it came to sex, I tried my best to follow the rules. And occasionally I broke those, and it really caused me a lot of stress and grief, and I had a lot of struggles with that in college, especially considering that I was working in a church ministry at the same time. I wasn't a pastor at that point, but I was working in conjunction with a pastor who sort of oversaw my life. And there were elements of my sexual life that I had to keep hidden because I wasn't being good enough and I didn't want to be rejected. By the way, I do want to add that in some of those encounters, in some of those relationships, I did have to pay consequences. I don't think it was a religious consequence, by the way. I don't think it was God trying to strike me down. It was I chose something, and there were consequences for it. Some of them were physical, some of them were emotional, some of them were mental or relational. But wading into the world of sexuality and opening myself up to that, I make choices, and so I had to accept consequences. And those consequences helped me become who I am today, even now, in how I look at sex and sexuality and how we are sexual beings. So I'm the first one to admit I wasn't pure and I wasn't an angel. I was just a human being who was a sexual being. So after college, I graduated and went to seminary to become a pastor. And what happened in seminary was I discovered online porn. It was in the early 90s, well, the mid 90s, I guess, and the internet was becoming very much more accessible. And so I found pornography on the internet, and I began to see sex in various new ways. Growing up in rural Oklahoma in a conservative community, there was straight, which was the right way, there was gay, which was the wrong way, and then there was just weird. That's how it broke out in my little corner of rural Oklahoma. When I went to college, my understanding of gay expanded, and so I began to understand lesbian and bisexual. I also began to see that right and wrong in that issue wasn't as clear cut as the Bible. Still had some pretty strong opinions about it, and I do have to admit that my opinions then are not something I'm proud of today. I shut the door on a lot of understanding of gay and lesbian and bisexual siblings within the community and in the health, I mean in the global connection. But I also discovered that sex was something to explore and that there was a variety to be experienced. And so I began to be at least aware that it wasn't just for making babies. There was something more to it. Thank you, Mama Pistachio. I appreciate that so much. When I got into seminary, I really didn't expand my knowledge, but I did expand my vision as I encountered pornography and saw the variety of sexual acts and discovered kinks and really began to see that what was out there in the world was not as cut and dried as my little small world upbringing said about sex. I began to develop an attitude or a philosophy of sex that it really had three purposes. One was procreation, which was the official line of the church. That was why we were created as sexual beings, was to be fruitful and multiply, as the story goes. But I also saw that sex was an important part of connection between partners. That the people I had had sex with, I experienced a connection with them, not just in the the relationship around that, but also in those moments. There was something powerful happening within those times of being so intimate with somebody physically. And finally, I began to realize that it was for fun. It's strange that growing up in the church, no one ever said sex was fun. Now, people who were in school with me talked about sex being fun. But no one in the church ever said sex was fun. And the thing that I found was sex was amazingly fun. And so now my world was beginning to be challenged. I began to have to wonder, why was procreation and connection more important than recreation? And hold on to that thought, because I want to come back to that. Also, while I was in seminary and right after that, when my wife and I got married, right before we left, 2 weeks before we left for seminary. But during those 4 years of seminary and the next 5 years of beginning my ministry, I began to really have the cross-dressing aspect of my identity emerge. And I don't say that in a sense that it emerged publicly or even within my relationship. What happened was that it began to emerge privately and secretly. And that's how I began to experience that even more closely. I dabbled in it as a teenager, but really having that time and that self-awareness to explore that happened in those first 5 years of marriage and the 4 years of seminary. So there's about 10 years in there, starting a family and beginning my career, where I just really began to explore who I was. Around 2014, I encountered a blog article about a webcomic that really opened my eyes and made a huge difference in how I thought about sex. The webcomic is called, because it's still ongoing, is called Oh Joy Sex Toy, and it's written by Erica Moen, and it's illustrated by her partner, Matthew Nolan. And I was going to bring the book in here, but when I gathered all my stuff, I forgot it. But you can find more of their stuff online at Oh Joy Sex Toy. You can also pick up the 3 volumes of Erica and Matthew's books that talk about sex in wonderful ways. But it started out as a web comic. And the thing that I discovered while I was looking at this comic and reading it weekly was that the attitudes about sex and the variety of sexual expressions was okay. That it was okay to think about these subjects of sex and the subject of sex in so many different ways, to be able to talk about our feelings about sex and the fears and the things that bind us up when we approach the subject of sex, but also the variety that we have. Not everyone is cut from the same cloth, as it were. We are all different, and we all have different warps and weaves to who we are, so that whenever we talk about being sexual beings, we express ourselves differently. And then in 2016, Erica and Matthew did a particular comic that blew my mind. And it was a comic specifically on sex positivity. And whenever I think about my awakening to the importance and the role of sex within human lives, and the variety and the validity of sexual experiences within our lives, that comic, that one strip, did more to open my mind to the idea that it is okay to think about sex as something more than a procreative act, and to think about sex at a wider perspective than just two people who are married in a monogamous committed relationship connecting through sex. And finally, I just embraced the fact that sex was fun. And that's so challenging for somebody who's living their life as a career clergy person, speaking to people all the time who want sex left behind closed doors. Thus the name of this show. I want to bring it out and talk about it. I want to talk about the fact that sex is fun, and sex is a wonderful bonding experience, not just between committed monogamous partners. And I want to talk about the variety of healthy sexual experiences that do not revolve around creating a new generation of human beings. That there's more to it than making babies. So that article opened my eyes, and I began this journey of where I am today. A journey that includes my work on this show, my work as I continue to work in becoming certified as a sex coach, but also my understanding of who I am, my gender, my sexuality, my sexual orientation, my favorites, my hard no's, those things that I'm just not participating in. Because of sex positivity, I've learned so much more about myself than I have really anything else. Once I was able to get past sort of the walls and the boundaries that had been built around sex in the church, I understood myself as a sexual human being much better and in deeper ways. So, what did Erica say in her webcomic that just blew my mind? Well, she said 4 things. First, she said, sexuality is vast. Again, growing up in the 80s in rural Oklahoma, there were 3 options. Hey, Jill. I'm glad to see you came in. There were 3 options in southeastern rural Oklahoma in the 80s, and that was straight, that was gay, and that was weird. And my drive to dress in women's clothes would have been called weird. And so I didn't talk about it. I didn't discuss it, and I didn't try to bring any attention to myself. Because at that time, I thought I was normal, except for this one thing. And that one thing was enough to create some very serious barriers of the vastness of sexuality and gender expression. But Erica says it's vast. Sexuality is vast. When I got to college, I found there were lesbian people and bisexual people, and that one was mind-blowing. For somebody who grew up in a situation where straight and gay were the only 2 options, it's like, okay, you can go both directions. That's news to me. How? No, I don't need to know how, because I'm not sure that that's how I am. But I also kind of discovered a few other experiences that, not personally, although I did discover oral sex while I was in college. And even within some Christian communities, that was a taboo. That was a no-no. And so, yeah, I did broaden my horizons a little bit about sexual activity in my own life. But I also discovered that there was a lot more variety out there. I discovered open marriages existed and open relationships, and I discovered that, casual sex was not something that just destroyed somebody's life. That it was indeed just humans behaving like humans. but I was still working in the church. So, there was an official party line that says, that's wrong, you're going to hell. So just understand, I had to talk the talk, but I was struggling with walking that talk and being able to incorporate that fully into my understanding that was growing. When I was in seminary and beginning in ministry and the internet was coming into my life and I discovered online porn, the varieties were just overwhelming. And it's like, I still don't get some of this stuff. And 30 years later, I still don't get some of this stuff. But that's okay. I don't have to get it all. I just need to know that the varieties are out there and that people experience it for the same reasons that I experience what I like to experience. It brings us pleasure. It brings us to a sense of owning our sexual space, so to speak. To be able to be in touch with our bodies, to know what we like and what we don't like, and then to communicate that with another person, or even to be free to communicate that to ourselves. I don't ask people, on the street, what kind of kink are you into? I usually wait until we have at least an introduction before I start that. But the way you experience sex, the way I experience sex, it's okay, as long as some safe rules are in place. As long as you and your partner and those who are directly and indirectly involved understand consent and practice consent, and we'll get into that just a little bit more in a second. As long as you are listening and respecting other people's space as sexual beings, it's okay. It's okay to have those differences of likes. Sexuality is vast. Even the people who are in the chat right here, I can probably guess that every one of us who's in chat probably has one sexual practice or preference that is different from anybody else in the chat. And that's okay. Because we are unique human beings who are created and born as sexual beings. And that uniqueness of what we like or don't like is okay. All right, the second thing that Erica said is that you have to keep consent essential. And I like how that's phrased there. Consent is essential. You cannot avoid that. I still hold that there is a very deep, intimate connection that happens between people who are sexual with one another. Whether that is physically or emotionally sexual, and I'm not going to be able to get into that really deep right here. The mind and the emotions are part of our ability to be whole in our sexual experience. How we think and how we feel in that moment determines how sexual we are with whoever we're partnered with in that time, whether that's another individual, a group of individuals, or ourselves. If we're not emotionally and mentally into it, sex is not going to be a fulfilled experience. So, yes, you can mentally have sex. Yes, you can emotionally have sex. And when you are with someone and you are able to engage that, you're connected with them. Doesn't mean that casual sex cannot happen. It can. Doesn't mean that angry sex can't happen. It does. Sadly, violent sex happens. And we can't avoid that subject. And that's why consent is essential. If someone does not consent, that is a hard no. It's an immediate hard no. Even an I don't know should be considered as a no. In consent, a yes is the only yes. A maybe or an I don't know or another time requires setting that off of the table. Maybe for a few minutes, maybe until the next sexual encounter, maybe until you have the opportunity to sit down and talk about it. But consent is essential. Because to intrude upon somebody else's life, to intrude upon their sexual being, is to remove from them their control of themselves. To be allowed to enter into a space, whether that's a body space, a mind space, a heart space, a spirit space, it's a powerful act of connection. I think that connection, that intimate tying of two individuals together through body or mind or heart or spirit, I think that tying together of people is a necessary thing when we talk about sex. Because the less we talk about that, the more we sexualize a person into an object. The less we consider that another person's body or mind or heart or spirit space is their own, the more they become an object that we can do with as we wish. We dehumanize. To take away someone's power of consent, to take away their voice of yes or no, is to put them in a place where they are a less than human. And that's violence. Because whether we are emotionally or mentally or physically dehumanizing somebody and acting our will upon them, and they have no voice to stop, that's violence. Consent is essential. You cannot experience a healthy form of sex or intimacy or relationship without it. You got to have consent. And I've continued to grow in my understanding of consent. It's not just a sexual thing. Consent happens at so many different levels. And when we stop and we think about how we talk to one another, sometimes we don't have consent to say the things we say, and we assume the relationship. We assume something in that connection that we have with another person. And so we say things believing that we have the right when we don't. And we leave that conversation with hurt and brokenness. It's hard to ever get rid of that memory of that brokenness. Consent happens at every level of a relationship and not just in the bed. All right, the third thing, foster tolerance. Tolerance has gotten such a bad rap. Tolerance has gotten this rap that it's a broken word. I kind of look at it differently. Tolerance is a part of a progression. When I was in college, I had a wonderful mentor who taught me the importance of hearing every side of a position and listening to them so that you begin to try to understand where they are coming from, and therefore can respond to that appropriately and accept it or refute it or reject it. That mentor and that lesson carried over so far into my life that it's how I conducted all of my work as a pastor. It's how I worked in different settings with people with vastly different theological viewpoints than my own. In fact, most of the churches I was in, I had a vastly different theological perspective than the people that I was living among and working with. But that idea of at least respecting the differences that each of us have gave me the opportunity to learn, to listen, to hear. So I think fostering tolerance begins with respecting differences in order to learn, to discover, and to approach that in at least a new set of eyes and see it from a different light. And then there's the idea of honoring those differences so that you can have a healthy conversation, a healthy dialogue. Whenever someone is different, being able to honor that fact that they are a different person doesn't give me the luxury to say, well, I'm right, you're wrong, therefore I'm the authority in this. In fact, just the opposite. If I can honor somebody, if I can honor you in the ways that we are different, I don't have to be right in our dialogue, in our conversation. If I can honor you where you are right, and I am right. And that's okay. We don't have to have a wrong in a conversation. So if you like performing oral sex and somebody else does not like performing oral sex, you're both right. If you happen to be partners, there's conversation that needs to happen there, an understanding that needs to be reached, and consent that has to be achieved. But honoring those differences allows both sides to be right. So tolerance involves respecting differences so that you can learn, honoring differences so that you can have that healthy conversation, that healthy dialogue, and then you get to tolerance, which is the ability to recognize your boundaries. Tolerance is the idea that we are separated by a barrier. We're separated by something that keeps us apart. Finding your boundary gives you the strength to say, I'm willing to meet you this far, but this is as far as I'm going to go. And if you try and come and drag me over to your side, you violated my boundary. You have taken one step too far. If I am here to listen and I honor that you are right, but you try to force me to come to your position, that is not acceptable. Tolerance only goes so far. It is not a complete open-ended acceptance of anything. Tolerance is the ability to go so far and then not be able to go any further. And so whenever you can tolerate something, I have a great pain tolerance. I can tolerate pain up to the point where I pass out. That's my 10. A lot of people will, if you've ever been in pain and they've asked you, rate your pain on a scale of 0 to 10, and you say 15, well, first of all, that's not very helpful. Second of all, if 10 is the maximum amount of pain that you can stand, then you're unable to experience pain after that because your brain shuts it off. Which, by the way, if you're in a serious amount of pain physically, but mentally you can't experience that, That's a form of shock, and you need to be in a hospital somewhere. But I've experienced pain that goes all the way to a 10. And how do I know it was a 10? Because all the little stars and birdies that you see in the cartoons showed up, and I was getting ready to go down onto the ground, passed out. I can tolerate it up to a point a little less than that. For me, it's about a 7. And the satanic sesame seed that I had, which is a kidney stone, proved to me that from a 9 to a 10, there's a lot of room. But I digress. Tolerating it doesn't mean that I have to go all the way to a 10. Tolerating it means I get to where I can't tolerate it. And then I get help. I back away from it. When we encounter somebody who is different from us sexually, in our opinions or our sexuality or how we express what we like, if they are not asking us to do it to them, they're not really taking anything from us. They're not really violating our boundary. You know, if I tell you that my sexual pleasure is to have ice cream shoved into my ear, and you're lactose intolerant, I'm not asking you to do that. I'm just telling you what I like. To be able to tolerate somebody is to respect their difference, to learn, to honor their difference, and say, you're right. And then to tolerate it means if you're not asking anything of me, I can let you do what you do. Or, as the vernacular is now, we don't have to yuck their yum. By the way, no, ice cream in my ear is just a waste of ice cream. Lastly, there's one thing that I learned from the church when it comes to acceptance. There are graduated forms of acceptance. There's welcoming, there's accepting, and there's affirming. So if we tolerate something and we allow it to interact with our boundaries, we're welcoming that to a degree. But that doesn't necessarily mean that we want to participate in it. I'm not very interested in degradation. I know some people find that arousing. It's not my thing. But I would welcome another person's input and wisdom and perspective on that. Then there's accepting. And accepting goes a little bit further to say, okay, you can share with me your idea. I may be even open to experiencing that with you. It may not be something that I like, but I'm willing to at least try. And then finally, there's affirming. To be able to take something and say, yeah, this is absolutely something that I would like to be a part of my life, and thank you for introducing that to me. Tolerance does not mean we have to just take everything and throw it into our life and say, well, there you go, I'm a tolerant human being. No, there's sort of a graduated building of that. So we start with respecting the differences to learn. We then move on to honoring the differences to say, you know what, you're right. I'm also right. And then there's that idea of respecting our own boundaries, that if somebody is trying to take us beyond our boundaries, we can back off and say, no, that is not going to work. And then we move into welcoming something, letting it come in and, share a chair with us at the dinner table. And then there's accepting something and being able to say, I'd be willing to try it. It's not something that I need to do, but I'm willing to at least, see what it's like. And then finally affirming and bringing it into our lives and saying, yeah, this is definitely something that I want to be a part of my life. All right, so sexuality is vast, keep consent essential, and finally, foster tolerance. The fourth and final thing that Erica said about sex positivity is this: everyone is entitled to comprehensive sexual education. Everybody should have a comprehensive understanding of what sex is, how we are sexual beings, the wonders of it all, the consequences of it all, but most importantly, how it applies to every one of us. That's why I love her books. In fact, the first two volumes are written, well, they are lifted from the webcomic, but the third volume that just was released a couple of months ago is written especially for teenagers in college, younger ages, because she believes that everyone needs to have comprehensive sex education. I integrated this idea of sex positivity, that everyone needed to have access to comprehensive sex education, that I created a curriculum in one of my churches, and I taught a junior and senior high school retreat on relationships, intimacy, sex, and purity. Now, it was not a purity concept of the purity culture of many aspects of sex education in the church. This was more about purity and owning yourself and knowing who you are, but understanding that those relationships that you choose, or those things that you identify about yourself through your life and through your activities and through your words, they are things that stick with you. So it was more about being true to yourself and being honest and having integrity about who you are and how you portray yourself. But that's why I'm doing this show. I believe everybody has the right to learn that they are a sexual being, and that they have every right to have a recreational, pleasurable, sexual life. Yeah, I said that right. They have a right to have a recreational, pleasurable, sexual life. We were created for it. We were created so that sex would be fun. We were, for whatever reason, created, made, the body formed together, all of this stuff, hodgepodge. I don't care how you look at where humanity comes from as a creature. Something within our bodies decided that when we develop sexual organs, when we develop those things that are related to our sexual being, they were interwoven with, and in sometimes extremely connected to, the pleasure centers of our nervous system. When we have sex, when we encounter someone or ourselves in a sexual way, it is about pleasure. That's the reality of it. We are not sexual just to make babies. And that's a dangerous concept anyway, that has led to some very serious mistakes about sexuality and gender and relationships. And really the way that women are treated in general. If anyone tunes into my show, I want you to know one thing. You deserve to have a good sex life. You deserve to have a pleasurable sex life. And if anything gets in the way of that, I want to help. I don't mean that I want to have a pleasurable sexual experience with you, but I want to listen. And maybe I can share some of my perspective, some of the things that I've learned. But if you want to know more about sex positivity, I could not recommend Oh Joy Sex Toy or Erica Moen and Matthew Nolan anymore. They are delightful. Their comics are whimsical. Their facts are checked. And they really want the same thing that I've been talking about. They want people to have a healthy sex and intimacy and relationship life. So, that's all I got to say about that. Y'all got any questions or comments? Let's play it up in the chat. Come on, somebody's got to be alive out there. Did I put everybody to sleep already? I mean, heavens, it was only 50 minutes of me talking. Come on. Charlotte, are you even awake? Charlotte, are you even here? I think my mod has abandoned me. Hello, is this thing on? Hi. Well, seeing as there is no comments. Oh, hi, Jill. I'm glad to see you there. I do want to advertise one thing. This is a non-paid endorsement. And I want to share with you all that Melissa Murdoch, who is a makeup artist and works with various celebrities in and around the celebrity industry, I guess you could say. She works with transgender femme individuals who want to improve their makeup presentation. And if you go to theprettyfix.com. Oh, hey, Jess. I understand meetings, especially, if you have a meeting where you need to be a grown-up. It's kind of hard to talk about sex in that, huh? All right, if you go to theprettyfix.com, you will see this right here. Oh, shoot. Let me do this. The free class alert. If you click on that, it's going to take you over to Eventbrite. Melissa is offering on Saturday a free makeup class just for trans femme individuals. And if you are struggling with your look, if you're struggling with how you present yourself, or you just want a few more tips and tricks on how to do your makeup so that it best accentuates your feminine self, then follow that link and sign up for that. It is Saturday only, but I can tell you, I did one of Melissa's other makeup tutorials for gender femme. It was amazing. She opened my eyes and she taught me some new perspectives. And this is a lot more about, it's not so much hands-on, get the makeup on your face like Sephora or Ulta would do, but this is definitely more along the lines of, how does makeup make you look better? How does it hide features that you want to hide? So this is going to be helpful if you're one of those that you've played with a little bit, you kind of have a few looks, but you're not really satisfied. I think this is a perfect one for you. Again, it is free. It is for trans femmes. It is not going to be dealing with trans mask or non-binary looks. It is trying to create that more feminine appearance. And yes, I am already signed up for it. If you've ever done Melissa's other workshops I ask her, and her Makeup Made Easy workshop was totally different than this one. There may be a few things that she touches on, but yeah, this is going to be a new thing, and she encouraged me to go ahead and sign up, so I did. So if you want to learn a few things, go ahead and check that out, and maybe I'll see you in the chat on that day. So, all right, any other questions? I like that, Charlotte. I don't guess I realized that you had done anything with Melissa, so that's great. Okay, anything else? Questions, comments, suggestions? All right. Well, thank you all so much for coming by and staying here and listening to me ramble for an hour. If you do have questions, or you want to talk about issues of sexuality, issues of intimacy, issues of relationship, you can contact me through the Discord, or you can find my contact information at our website, thetransverse.net. But most importantly, if you do not find that your sexual life is pleasurable or fulfilling, you do not have to suffer. You can find a way to that. So, go out there and have a good life. Enjoy yourself. Live free. Live strong. Thank you, Jess. Appreciate you coming in during your meeting. And I will talk to you all next week. Bye.